Good news has arrived for Nnamdi Kanu, and it has come from the most powerful place it possibly could, a court of superior jurisdiction that sat down, combed through his case with surgical precision, and arrived at a verdict that most legal observers never imagined they would see delivered within Nigeria's federal judicial system. It found a fatal flaw buried at the core of the life sentence handed to him, tore that sentence from the record, and capped the whole ruling with a compensation order in his favor. This is not the kind of procedural housekeeping that courts perform routinely. This is a higher judicial authority looking a lower court's judgment squarely in the face and declaring it built on a broken legal foundation. To appreciate the true gravity of what has happened, you need to travel back to the moment Justice James Omatsho brought his hammer down and imposed that life sentence. At the heart of that ruling were specific statutory provisions, the very laws he cited as his authority for handing down such severe punishment. Those provisions were not decorative references, they were the load-bearing walls of the entire judgment. The severity of the sentence, every legal consequence that flowed from it, and the years Kanu spent under the shadow of that ruling, all of it stood or fell on whether those statutes were correctly applied. The reviewing court has now answered that question, and the answer is damning. The appeal lawyers who brought the challenge did not arrive in court swinging at every corner of the original trial. Their attack was precise and disciplined. They zeroed in on the sentencing stage and made one argument with great force, that the statutory provision Justice Omatsho leaned on to justify a life sentence simply did not, under any sound reading of Nigerian criminal law, authorize that category of punishment for the specific charges before the court. The wrong legal instrument had been used to deliver a life-altering consequence. They went further, arguing that this was not the kind of clerical slip that courts can quietly repair without disturbing the larger ruling. The error was structural. It had poisoned the sentencing decision from its roots. The higher court took that argument and ran it through every layer of scrutiny available to it. Judges on the reviewing panel pulled the complete trial records, studied the original written judgment bearing Justice Omatsho's signature, reviewed the transcripts of the proceedings, considered the legal submissions of both prosecution and defense during the trial, and examined the full text of the statutory provisions in question. They then traced how those provisions had been interpreted in past cases, testing whether the interpretation applied during Kanu's sentencing aligned with what the law had consistently been understood to mean. This was not a rushed exercise. The court was after legal truth, not a convenient exit from a politically sensitive matter. What the panel found at the end of that process was not ambiguous. The statute invoked at the sentencing stage did not carry the legal weight required to impose a life sentence under the circumstances of the case. The court was emphatic that criminal sentencing is never a space where judicial creativity is welcome. Every punishment handed down by a criminal court must be anchored in a specific legal provision that authorizes precisely that punishment for precisely those charges. When that anchor is missing, or when a statute has been stretched beyond what it was ever designed to cover, the resulting judgment becomes legally unsound. That is the exact conclusion the court reached about what happened to Nnamdi Kanu. The consequences of that conclusion move in several directions simultaneously, and each of them matters. The most immediate is the fate of the sentence itself. A life sentence produced through a misapplication of a statute is, under Nigerian law, no punishment at all. The reviewing court did not hesitate. It formally set the sentence aside, stripped it from the record, and nullified every legal consequence that had been attached to it. Official court registries and case files were directed to be updated at once to reflect this outcome. The punishment that had defined Kanu's legal existence for years was gone. The court then turned its attention to accountability and remedy, and this is where the ruling deepened in significance. The panel did not consider its work finished after simply removing the defective sentence. It looked at the period during which Kanu had lived under the weight of a legally invalid punishment, acknowledged that this had caused him genuine and measurable harm, and accepted the arguments made by his legal team on this point. The court's reasoning was clear. A punishment imposed through an incorrectly applied statute is a violation of the legal protections that every defendant in a criminal proceeding is entitled to. That kind of harm is not abstract. It strikes at liberty and legal rights in the most concrete ways possible, and under Nigerian law it is capable of attracting remedy. A compensation order was issued in Kanu's favor accordingly. Justice Omatsho himself did not escape the scrutiny of the panel's conclusions. Since the defective sentence had come from beneath his judicial authority, the reviewing court addressed his role directly and without softening its language. Judges, the panel stated, bear a legal obligation to ensure that the statutory provisions they invoke during sentencing are valid, applicable, and properly interpreted before applying them. That obligation is not a courtesy. It is a core condition of holding judicial office. A judge who hands down a sentence on the basis of a legal provision that does not support that punishment has produced a defective ruling, and the responsibility for that defective ruling belongs to the judge who signed it. The court drew that line with precision, attributing the error directly to how Justice Omatsho handled the statutory basis of his sentencing decision. For anyone familiar with the professional culture of Nigeria's bench, that is a statement with serious implications. The court did not stop at resolving the immediate facts. It used the ruling to make a statement about the standards Nigerian criminal courts must uphold at all times. Judicial authority in criminal matters is never unlimited. Courts are always bounded by the sentencing parameters set by the statutes governing the case before them. Appellate courts exist precisely because those boundaries are sometimes crossed, and because someone with the power to correct such crossings must exist within the system. When courts impose punishments that no law has authorized, the damage ripples outward. Individual defendants suffer, but so does public confidence in the entire judicial enterprise. The correction made in this case is larger than Nnamdi Kanu alone. It is a recalibration of what the Nigerian criminal justice system is supposed to stand for. The institutional courage embedded in this outcome should not pass without recognition. To take a sentencing decision made by a judge in a terrorism-related case of this magnitude, confirm that a legal error was committed, formally nullify the resulting life sentence, and direct that compensation be paid requires a judicial system willing to hold itself accountable before the law, rather than before political convenience. That is not a small thing anywhere, and it is a particularly notable thing in this context. The life sentence is gone. The compensation order stands and is enforceable. The defective ruling has been removed from the official record. What comes next depends on whether the prosecution pursues further proceedings and on how the political undercurrents of this case continue to move. But the law has spoken its piece with unmistakable clarity. The statute was wrong for the sentence it was used to justify. The sentence was wrong for the case it was attached to. The harm was real, and however long it took, the judicial system has now moved to answer for it.